They say betrayal doesn't come with thunder. It comes in whispers, in the softest places, where you least expect it. Mine came in the form of a lipstick stain, the wrong shade, the wrong curve on the collar of the man I loved. I remember the moment vividly. The late evening sun slanting across the kitchen counter, the smell of roasted chicken cooling on the table, the hush of a home I thought was safe. And then my husband walking in, late again, his tie loosened, his shirt wrinkled. When I reached to hug him, I saw it. A kiss-shaped print in a color I'd never owned. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 37 years old. And the day I realized my husband, the man I built a life with, the man I sacrificed for, was cheating on me, was the day I stopped being a wife in the shadows of someone else's story. I stopped being their victim. But this isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's about revenge, carefully, cleverly delivered. It's about how I turned their affair into their downfall, using their own greed and arrogance against them. Because when I found out my husband was cheating with his secretary, I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I hired her husband to work with us. And that was the beginning of their end. But let me take you back to before the lipstick, before the cracks. Because betrayals don't start big. They start small, and if you ignore them long enough, they rot the entire foundation. When I first met David, I thought I'd stumbled into the kind of love you only read about in novels. I was 26, fresh out of grad school with a degree in marketing, carrying student debt, and a head full of ambition. He was 29, already working in finance, confident in a way that made me feel both safe and breathless. We married 3 years later. Our life looked perfect from the outside. A cozy suburban home with gray shutters, a little garden in the back where I planted roses, a dog named Bailey who followed us from room to room. We looked like the couple who had it all. But perfection has a cost. David's job kept him late. Too late. At first, I told myself it was the nature of finance, of chasing clients and closing deals. He'd come home tired, loosen his tie, kiss my forehead and mumble, "It's all for us, Claire." I believed him. I wanted to believe him. And for a while I did. I poured myself into keeping our home together. I supported his career, even when it meant setting aside my own ambitions. I cooked dinners, planned vacations, paid bills, kept the world steady so his could spin faster. That was the deal, or so I thought. But somewhere along the way, his eyes stopped meeting mine. His hugs grew perfunctory, his kisses absent. When I asked if he was okay, he'd sigh, annoyed. "Not everything's about you, Claire." That's how it begins. Not with lipstick, but with small cruelties that wear you down. And then one day, the lipstick arrives. That evening, when I saw it, I didn't confront him right away. I tucked the observation deep inside and smiled as though nothing was wrong. But later that night, when he fell asleep on the couch, I checked his phone. I know, some people will say that was my betrayal. But when you've spent years silencing your intuition, the truth feels like the only lifeline. And there it was. Dozens of messages. Her name flashing across the screen. Sophie. Sophie, his secretary. At first, the texts were harmless enough. "Don't forget the Henderson file. Meeting rescheduled to 2. But then, tucked between those, the others. Can't stop thinking about you. Last night was amazing. And one photo. Blurry, intimate, unmistakable. My stomach turned. My hands shook. Bailey nudged my leg, sensing the storm inside me. I put the phone down. I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I began to notice everything I had ignored before. The way he dressed sharper on days he claimed were just paperwork. The way he scrolled through his phone with a secret smile. The way Sophie's name slipped casually into conversation. Sophie's so organized. Sophie handled it. Her name had been living in my house long before I noticed. For days, I carried the truth like a shard under my skin. I went to work, came home, cooked dinner, smiled when he made excuses. But at night, when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I began to think. Not just about what he'd done to me, but about what I could do to them. Because here's the thing. Sophie wasn't just a secretary. She was married too. Married to a man named Mark, a man I'd met once at a company holiday party. Quiet, polite, the kind of man who looked like he carried too much on his shoulders. And that's when the seed of my revenge took root. What if I didn't just expose them? What if I didn't just end my marriage? What if I turned their betrayal into a weapon so sharp they'd never see it coming? I didn't want to burn the house down in a fit of rage. No. I wanted something colder, smarter. Something they couldn't wriggle out of with apologies and lies. So, I made a decision. I would hire Sophie's husband, Mark, to work with us. Not just as a bystander. Not just as a prop. But as my ally. Because if David and Sophie thought their secret affair gave them the upper hand, they had no idea what was about to hit them. That night, as David slept, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop glowing against the dark. I pulled up Mark's LinkedIn profile. He was an IT specialist, skilled, underemployed in a smaller firm that didn't match his resume. His face in the photo was serious, tired, the look of a man underestimated. I knew that look. I'd worn it myself. And in that moment, I knew we could help each other. I sent a message. Simple, professional, harmless on the surface. Hi Mark, I'm Claire Dawson. We met briefly at the Keller Finance holiday party. I'm reaching out because I think there may be an opportunity for us to work together. Would you be open to a conversation? My finger hovered over the mouse. This was the edge of the cliff. Once I clicked, there was no going back. But I didn't hesitate. I clicked send. And in the silence of that midnight kitchen, with my husband sleeping 10 feet away and his mistress dreaming of another day at my expense, I smiled for the first time in weeks. Because the game had just begun. People often assume betrayal begins the moment you catch someone red-handed. But in truth, it begins much earlier. In the shadows of subtle disrespect, the cracks you convince yourself are harmless. Looking back, I can see the signs were there long before lipstick and late nights. To understand how I got here, you need to know where I came from. I grew up in a small town outside Chicago, the oldest of 3 girls. My father was a mechanic, my mother a nurse. We weren't rich, but we were solid. At least, that's what I thought as a child. My parents taught me that hard work was the only currency that mattered. Don't expect handouts, Claire. My dad would grumble while fixing a carburetor. You want something? Earn it. And I did. I was the dependable one, the girl who babysat neighborhood kids, worked at the library after school, earned scholarships to put myself through college. My sisters always called me the planner. Birthdays? I arranged them. Family crises? I cleaned up the mess. It was just who I was, steady, responsible, almost invisible in my reliability. So when I met David in my mid-20s, his attention felt like sunlight after a long winter. He was ambitious, sharp-dressed, charming in that way people in finance often are. Where I was cautious, he was bold. Where I second-guessed, he was certain. When he looked at me, it was like he saw past the responsible girl into someone extraordinary. Or maybe I just wanted to believe he did. We married 3 years later. The first few years were golden. Dinners out, vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines, little surprises like flowers left on my desk at work. I thought I'd finally found someone who would carry half the weight with me instead of piling on more. But slowly things shifted. At first, it was small comments. If I wore a new dress, David would say, "That's cute, but you don't really have the figure for it." If I suggested a weekend away, he'd sigh, "Do you know how expensive that would be?" Always couched as jokes. Always with a smile. Enough to sting, but not enough to fight over. When I got a promotion at my marketing firm, I came home bubbling with pride. David congratulated me, then added, "Well, as long as it doesn't distract you from supporting me. My career's the real long-term play here." I laughed it off, but something in me deflated. Little by little his world took priority. My long hours became selfish, his became heroic. If I ordered takeout after a long day, I was lazy. If he forgot to eat, he was dedicated. I began to shrink myself without realizing it. Turned down social invitations so I could keep dinner warm for him. Skipped yoga classes I loved because he didn't like wasting money on hobbies. Even our finances shifted. My salary quietly absorbed into joint expenses, while his bonuses were for investments. Investments I never saw. At family gatherings, he played the golden husband. Charming, attentive, always with a hand on my back. But in private, he grew more critical. You've let yourself go. Why are you so sensitive? You'd be nothing without me. Words sharp enough to wound, but soft enough to deny if I challenged them.
And I stayed.
Because that's what women like me are taught to do.
Keep the peace.
Be grateful. Don't rock the boat. I told myself it wasn't abuse, not really. I had a roof over my head, didn't I? He never hit me. He provided. And if I felt small, well, maybe I was just too sensitive. That's how they keep you quiet. They make you doubt your own reflection. Then came Sophie. At first, she was just a name. My secretary's got that covered. Sophie's a lifesaver. I even met her once, briefly, at a holiday party. She was younger than me by almost a decade, with glossy hair, an easy laugh, and that deferential smile women sometimes wear when they're trying to survive in male-dominated offices. I didn't think much of her then. If anything, I pitied her. She worked late nights, ran errands, booked reservations, all the invisible labor that made men like David look effortlessly successful. I assumed she was just another overworked assistant. But the mentions of her grew more frequent. The late nights multiplied. When I asked, David brushed me off. Don't be paranoid, Claire. She's just a secretary. Still, the distance between us stretched. He came home smelling of cologne he didn't wear for me. He kept his phone face down on the counter. He stopped reaching for me in bed. I told myself it was stress. That marriages had seasons. That if I just tried harder, cooked better, dressed prettier, complained less, he would come back. But trying harder only made the silence louder. By the time I found the lipstick, I was already fraying at the edges. I'd been carrying the weight of our marriage for so long that betrayal almost felt inevitable, like watching a storm roll in after months of warnings. And yet, when it finally hit, it still shattered me. I sat in our kitchen that night, staring at the stain, at the phone I dared to check, at the proof of everything I feared. Bailey, our golden retriever, laid his head on my knee, sensing the shift in the air. For hours, I sat there. Not crying, not screaming, just unraveling quietly. Memories replayed. The dismissive comments, the financial imbalance, the way Sophie's name had slipped into our lives like a guest who never left. I realized then that the cheating wasn't a sudden betrayal. It was the culmination of years of erosion. And for the first time, I asked myself, what if I stopped playing the role they assigned me? What if I didn't beg him to change? What if I didn't pack my bags and leave in tears? What if I fought back, not with rage, but with strategy? That's when I thought of Mark, Sophie's husband, the quiet man from the holiday party who stood awkwardly by the punch bowl, watching his wife work the room. He had looked so resigned, like someone who'd learned to endure. I knew that look. I lived that look. And an idea sparked. Maybe we could endure together. Or better yet, maybe we could turn endurance into revenge. Over the next few days, I played my part. Smiled when David told me he was working late. Kissed his cheek when he left in suits pressed sharper than usual. Cooked dinners he barely touched. Outwardly, I was the same obedient wife. Inwardly, I was drafting my plan. Because betrayal had taken enough from me. Now, it was time to take something back. And I knew exactly where to start. They say heartbreak is a clean break, like glass shattering all at once. But betrayal isn't like that. Betrayal is erosion, slow, relentless, until one day you realize the cliff has crumbled under your feet. After I saw the lipstick and the messages, I didn't explode. I didn't pack a bag and storm out. No, I stayed quiet. And in that quiet, I started noticing things I'd missed before. Patterns, details, evidence. David thought I was blind. But I was watching. The first thing I noticed was the money. Our accounts had always been joint, but joint meant different things for him and me. My salary paid the mortgage, groceries, utilities. His salary, or rather his bonuses, went into investments I never saw. But in the weeks after I discovered Sophie, the spending changed. Charges I didn't recognize began to appear. A jewelry store receipt tucked in his briefcase for a delicate gold necklace I never received. Dinners for two at restaurants I'd never been to. A hotel bill downtown, disguised as a client event. When I asked, he shrugged. Business dinners. You wouldn't understand. I wanted to scream. I understand perfectly. But I bit my tongue and made a note in the small leather journal I'd started keeping in my nightstand. Date, amount, excuse.
Proof.
The second thing I noticed was his phone. He guarded it like a second heartbeat. Always face down, always in his pocket. When it buzzed at night, he'd slip out of the room. When I asked who it was, he'd sigh, annoyed. Work, Claire. Do you want me to lose my job? Once, while he showered, I dared to pick it up. Locked, of course. But on the lock screen was a preview he hadn't cleared fast enough. Sophie's name. A message. Can't wait until tomorrow. Same place? My chest tightened, but I didn't cry. Instead, I wrote it down. Then came the humiliations. We attended a company dinner one Friday night, the kind with long tables, expensive wine, too much laughter. Sophie was there, of course, seated just 2 chairs away from David. She was glowing, hair styled, dressed just low-cut enough to draw eyes. Every time David spoke, her gaze lingered too long. Her laugh came too quick. And he didn't even hide it. He leaned toward her, whispered jokes, touched her arm lightly, as if the room wasn't watching. But the room was watching. And worse, they knew. I caught the glances from his colleagues. The raised eyebrows, the pitying looks that slid toward me when they thought I wasn't paying attention. That was the breaking point. Not just the affair, but the humiliation of being the only one pretending it wasn't happening. On the drive home, I sat in silence, my hands gripping the wheel while he scrolled his phone beside me. You were quiet tonight, he muttered. I forced a smile. Just tired. He nodded, distracted, typing quickly. No doubt to her. In that moment, the shame burned hotter than the heartbreak. I wasn't just betrayed, I was being made a fool of. And if there's one thing I cannot forgive, it's deliberate humiliation. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I'd left work early to surprise him, a home-cooked dinner, his favorite wine. But when I walked into the house, I froze. Laughter drifted from upstairs. A woman's laughter. My blood turned to ice. Quietly, I set the groceries on the counter and crept up the stairs. The bedroom door was ajar. And there, in the mirror across from the bed, I saw them. David.
Sophie.
Tangled. Careless. In my bed. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like the air had been vacuumed out of the room. I gripped the door frame so hard my knuckles turned white. Then Sophie's eyes flicked to the mirror.
She saw me.
For a split second, shock crossed her face. But then, and I'll never forget this, she smirked. As if daring me to scream. As if mocking me with her very silence. I didn't scream. I didn't even step inside. I turned and walked away. Down the stairs. Out the door. Into the cool night where Bailey sat by the porch, wagging his tail as if the world were normal. I drove aimlessly for hours, the city lights blurring into streaks. My hands shook on the steering wheel, but my mind was clear. It was over. Not the marriage that had been crumbling for years. What was over was my silence. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my journal open, flipping through pages of dates, charges, excuses. I looked at the evidence I'd quietly gathered. The receipts, the screenshots, the necklace receipt, the message previews. And I knew this wasn't enough to leave him. This was enough to destroy him. But I wasn't reckless. I wouldn't confront him in rage. That would give him the power to spin the story, to paint me as the hysterical wife, the crazy woman. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed leverage. And that's when my mind returned to Mark, Sophie's husband. I remembered him from the holiday party, quiet, polite, standing awkwardly in the corner while Sophie worked the room. He had the look of a man who had learned to endure his wife's absence, maybe even her betrayals. What if he knew? What if he suspected, but had no proof? What if he, like me, was drowning in humiliation with no way out? The thought lodged in my brain. Mark wasn't my enemy. He was my mirror. And maybe, just maybe, he could be my ally. The next morning I acted. While David showered, I pulled Sophie's business card from his jacket pocket, one she'd slipped in with his files. Her handwriting on the back. Personal cell, anytime. I smiled grimly.
Anytime.
Good. With her number, it took me less than an hour to find Mark's information online. IT specialist. Mid-level firm. Underpaid, overqualified. His LinkedIn photo showed the same tired expression I remembered. I drafted a message. Professional, simple. Hello, Mark. This is Claire Dawson. We met briefly at the Keller Finance holiday party. I may have a business opportunity I'd like to discuss with you. Would you be open to a meeting? I stared at it for a long time before hitting send. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with resolve. Because now the game was changing. That night, David came home late again. His tie was loose, his hair slightly mussed. He kissed my forehead absently, dropped his briefcase, and muttered something about long hours. I smiled sweetly, sliding his dinner plate toward him. Of course, darling. I know how hard you work. He didn't notice the steel under my voice. But I did. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I felt powerful. Because I wasn't broken anymore. I was angry. And soon, he was going to learn just how dangerous an angry woman with a plan can be. The morning after I sent Mark that message, I couldn't focus on anything else. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, like a loaded weapon. Every buzz made my pulse race. Would he respond? Or would he ignore me, dismissing me as some meddling wife with a bruised ego? By mid-afternoon, the notification came. Hello, Claire. Yes, I remember. I'm open to a conversation. When would you like to meet? I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. He hadn't brushed me off. That was all I needed. We agreed to meet 2 evenings later at a quiet cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral ground. I didn't want him to feel ambushed. When I walked in, I spotted him instantly. Same weary expression, same polite posture. He stood when I approached, offering a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Claire, he said, shaking my hand. His grip was firm, but his palm was damp. Nervous. Mark. Thank you for coming. We sat. The hum of the espresso machine filled the silence. I studied him. Lines etched deeper than his age suggested, shoulders slightly hunched, as if carrying invisible weight. I didn't waste time. I'll be direct. I know about Sophie. And David. The words landed like a stone dropped in water. His jaw tightened, his eyes flicked down. For a moment he said nothing. Then he gave a single, bitter laugh. I suspected, he admitted. Late nights. Secrets. Excuses. But hearing it out loud, he broke off, rubbing the back of his neck. I slid my phone across the table. On the screen were screenshots, messages between David and Sophie, the hotel receipts, the photo of Sophie's text preview.
Proof.
He stared at it for a long time. His throat worked as he swallowed hard. So it's true. Yes. My voice was steady. They think we're fools. But we don't have to be. His eyes lifted to mine, wary. What are you suggesting? I leaned forward. You're in IT, right? Underused where you are. I have a marketing firm. Small but growing. We're always in need of tech support. I can hire you. Bring you in. His brows furrowed. Why? Because if Sophie and David think their little secret is untouchable, they're wrong. I want them close. I want them to think nothing has changed. And while they're busy underestimating us, we'll gather everything we need. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something in him, not just pain, but resolve. The quiet rage of a man who'd been humiliated one time too many. He nodded slowly. So we watch. We wait. We build a case. Exactly. He sat back, exhaling sharply. You're not what I expected, Claire. What did you expect? A wife in tears, maybe. Screaming. Threatening. Not, he gestured toward me.
This.
I smiled, but it was cold. Crying won't get me my dignity back. Strategy will. Over the next few weeks, Mark became part of my world. Officially, he was hired as IT support for my firm. Unofficially, he was my ally. We kept everything professional on the surface. Emails about server issues, software upgrades, troubleshooting. But beneath the surface, we shared information, piecing together the puzzle of David and Sophie's affair. Mark set up discreet monitoring on David's company laptop. Nothing invasive, nothing illegal, just enough to catch patterns. Late-night logins. Suspicious file transfers. Calendar invites that didn't match his reported schedule. Meanwhile, I continued my act at home. Smiling, cooking, nodding when David came home late with yet another excuse. I kissed him goodnight, knowing Sophie's perfume still lingered on his collar. He never suspected a thing. At times, the performance nearly broke me. Some nights I lay awake, fury burning in my chest, wanting to scream. But then I'd remember Mark's weary face, the proof we were gathering, the plan slowly forming. And I held on. One evening, Mark called me. His voice was low, controlled, but charged with something new. "You need to see this." We met in my office after hours. He pulled up a series of files he'd recovered from David's drive. Expense reports, fraudulent entries, hotel bills disguised as client dinners. Even an account, a joint slush fund he and Sophie had been funneling money into, hidden under false codes. "They're not just cheating," Mark said grimly. "They're stealing. From the company." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. This wasn't just marital betrayal anymore. This was fraud. This was leverage. My hands trembled slightly as I touched the mouse, scrolling through the files. "If this comes out, they'll both be finished." Mark finished for me. His voice was tight, but there was a spark in his eyes now. Not just pain, but vindication. We looked at each other across the desk. For the first time, I didn't see two victims. I saw partners. That night, when I returned home, David was sprawled on the couch, scrolling his phone with a smug half-smile. He barely glanced up as I entered. "Long day," he muttered. I forced a smile. "You could say that." I walked past him into the kitchen, gripping the counter to steady myself. Because if he looked closely, if he really looked, he'd see it, the shift in me. But he didn't. He never did. The weeks that followed were a blur of preparation. Mark and I carefully gathered more evidence, expense reports, call logs, messages. Each piece tucked neatly into the binder I kept hidden in my office. The more we found, the clearer my plan became. I didn't just want to expose their affair. I wanted to dismantle their lives the way they had dismantled ours. Not with chaos, but with precision. And the best way to do that? Publicly. I began to arrange it quietly, strategically. An upcoming company gala. Perfect. All the right people in attendance. Executives, partners, clients. The place David and Sophie felt untouchable. That would be the stage. One night, while David slept, I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching him. His face was peaceful, unbothered. How easy it must be to betray someone and still sleep soundly. I whispered softly, words he couldn't hear. "You think you've won, but you're already standing in the trap." I turned off the light and slipped into bed, my heart steady, my resolve like steel. Because the countdown had begun, and soon, their lies would unravel in front of everyone who mattered. The night of the gala shimmered with all the false glamour that finance firms love to parade. Crystal chandeliers, men in tailored suits, women in glittering gowns, champagne glasses clinking like wind chimes. It was the kind of night designed to impress investors and flatter egos. David thrived in these rooms. He was already there when I arrived, surrounded by colleagues, laughing too loudly, gesturing too broadly. Sophie hovered near him, stunning in a silk dress that whispered luxury. She was careful not to stand too close, but the spark in her eyes betrayed her. They thought no one could see, but tonight everyone would. Mark stood across the room, near the AV booth, pretending to fuss with equipment. To anyone else, he was just the IT guy. To me, he was the co-architect of justice. We had rehearsed this moment for weeks, building every detail. I forced a smile as I walked into the crowd. People greeted me warmly, unaware of the storm about to break. My sapphire necklace glinted under the lights, a deliberate choice. I wanted to look calm, collected, unshaken. Because when the truth came out, I wanted everyone to remember my composure and their collapse. Halfway through the evening, the CEO tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate another successful quarter. Applause.
Toasts.
Laughter. And then, we'd like to recognize a few of our top-performing teams. David straightened, pride glowing on his face. Sophie clutched her glass, ready to bask in reflected glory. That was my cue. I rose from my chair and crossed to the stage, binder in hand. The CEO blinked at me in surprise. Claire? Did you want to? Yes, I said smoothly, taking the mic. My voice rang through the hall, steady and sharp. I'd like to say a few words about performance and integrity. The room quieted instantly. David's smile faltered. Sophie's glass wobbled in her grip. I've been part of this company's extended family for years. I began, pacing slowly, binder pressed to my side. I've watched the long hours, the sacrifices. I've believed in the vision. I paused, scanning the room, eyes locked on me, curious, intrigued. But I've also seen something else. Something rotten beneath the surface. A murmur rippled. David shifted in his seat, his jaw tight. Claire, he started, but I cut him off. Let me show you. I opened the binder and pulled out the first page, a hotel invoice. I held it up to the light. Expense report, billed to the company as a client dinner. Except the client never showed. Because this was no business meeting.
Gasps.
Whispers. Next page. A jewelry receipt. Company funds diverted for personal gifts. Not for a wife. For a secretary. The room buzzed louder now. Sophie's face drained of color. And here, I held up a printout Mark had recovered. Transfers to a hidden account. Thousands of dollars siphoned off, disguised as consulting fees. Both signed off by David Dawson and Sophie Bennett. I let the names hang in the air. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. David shot to his feet, red-faced. This is slander. She's making it up. I didn't flinch. I nodded toward the AV booth. Mark pressed a button. The screen behind us lit up with projections, email chains, timestamps, side-by-side comparisons of falsified entries and real records. Then, like the finale of a play, the photo, a text message from Sophie to David, laughing about draining the fund before anyone notices. The crowd erupted.
Gasps. Shouts.
Disbelief. Sophie dropped her glass. It shattered against the marble, echoing like a gunshot. David lunged for the mic. This is taken out of context. Claire's. Done staying silent. I cut in, my voice like steel. You thought you could use me, humiliate me, steal from this company and from our marriage and walk away clean. But tonight, everyone sees you for what you are. The CEO stepped forward, his face thunderous. David.
Sophie.
My office.
Now.
Security moved in, discreet but firm, guiding them away as the crowd buzzed with shock and gossip. David's eyes met mine as he passed. Fury, fear, and something else. Realization. That he had underestimated me. That I wasn't the obedient wife anymore. As they disappeared into the back offices, the CEO turned to me. Claire, thank you. This will be investigated immediately. I nodded, handing him the binder. Every piece of evidence is in here. Dates, receipts, transfers. Verified by IT. Mark stepped forward, calm and steady. I'll provide all digital logs as well. The CEO's eyes flicked between us, piecing it together. Then he gave a single sharp nod. Understood. The rest of the gala dissolved into chaos. People whispered in clusters, phones buzzed with texts, rumors spread like wildfire. I left quietly, slipping into the cool night. Mark followed me outside. For a moment, we just stood there under the city lights, the noise of the gala muffled behind us. You did it, he said softly. No, I corrected, meeting his gaze. We did it. For the first time in months, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. Not gone. Betrayal leaves scars that don't vanish overnight. But lighter, manageable. And behind me, in that glittering hall where my husband once basked in admiration, his empire of lies was crumbling. When I got home that night, David wasn't there. His briefcase sat abandoned by the couch, his tie draped carelessly over the armrest. Bailey padded over to me, tail wagging, sensing the shift in the air. I knelt, hugging him tightly, whispering into his fur. It's over, boy. The show's over. But deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Because when people like David and Sophie fall, they don't go quietly. They claw. They scheme. They try to drag others down with them. And I had to be ready, because their downfall had only just begun. The morning after the gala, I woke to silence. No footsteps, no grumbling about coffee, no clatter of David rushing out the door.
Just stillness.
For the first time in years, it felt like my house again. I made coffee, fed Bailey, and opened my phone. The news had already spread. Emails from colleagues. Texts from friends. Even a message from one of David's cousins. Claire, I'm so sorry. We all saw. You were incredible. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the headlines. Keller Finance rocked by internal scandal. Senior manager and secretary under investigation for fraud. Photos from the gala had leaked. David's face red with anger, Sophie's shattered glass sparkling on the marble floor. The internet did what it always does. Turned humiliation into spectacle. Comments flooded in, dissecting their affair, their arrogance, their downfall. By noon, David finally called. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual confidence. Claire, you've ruined me. I almost laughed at the irony. I ruined him?
No.
He had ruined himself, and all I had done was hold up a mirror. You did this, I said coldly. Not me. And I hung up. Over the next few weeks, the fallout consumed them. David was suspended immediately, pending investigation. His emails were audited, his office sealed. Rumors swirled that criminal charges might follow. The hidden account Mark uncovered became the nail in the coffin, irrefutable proof of embezzlement. Sophie was fired outright. No polite pending review. Just escorted out by security, her box of desk belongings clutched to her chest. Photos of her leaving the building hit the local news, her tear-streaked face plastered across social media. And then came the social exile. Friends who once flocked to their parties stopped answering calls. Colleagues who used to laugh at their jokes crossed the street to avoid them. Even their families distanced themselves. David's mother called me privately, whispering, "We always suspected he took you for granted, Claire. I'm ashamed to admit he's my son." It wasn't sympathy I felt. It was justice. But justice doesn't come without backlash. David showed up at the house one evening, pounding on the door. Bailey barked furiously from inside as I stood in the hallway, phone in hand. Claire, open up. His voice was ragged, desperate. We can fix this. Just say it wasn't true. Just please. I'll lose everything. I didn't open the door. I called through it, voice steady. You already lost everything. He kicked the door once, then left, his footsteps fading into the night. I sank to the floor, Bailey curling against me, my body trembling with adrenaline. I realized then, David wasn't angry anymore. He was afraid. And fear was the first stage of his collapse. The investigation moved quickly. Within a month, charges were filed. Embezzlement, falsifying expense reports, breach of fiduciary duty. David's lawyer tried to negotiate, but the evidence was overwhelming. Sophie, too, was dragged into it, charged as an accomplice, her name smeared across court documents for everyone to see. At the preliminary hearing, I sat in the back, Mark beside me. David avoided my gaze. His once proud shoulders slumped. Sophie looked smaller than I remembered, her glossy hair limp, her eyes hollow. Their lawyers tried to argue it was a misunderstanding, but the judge wasn't moved. Trial was set. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because justice was done, not yet, but because the truth was no longer mine alone to carry. The community's reaction was swift and merciless. At the grocery store, Neighbors whispered as Sophie walked past. At the gym, David's former colleagues muttered openly about his greed. They had built their reputations on charm and confidence. Without those shields, they were nothing but frauds in expensive clothes. Even Mark's life began to change. Once the quiet, overlooked husband, he was now respected for helping uncover the scheme. His confidence grew. He held his head higher at work, colleagues seeking him out for advice. I could see the transformation, not just in him, but in myself. We weren't victims anymore. We were survivors. But downfall is never neat. One night, I received a letter from David. Scrawled, messy, full of excuses. I only did it for us. You pushed me. You made me feel inadequate. If you'd supported me more, I wouldn't have needed her. The words should have hurt. Once, they would have. But reading them, I felt nothing but disgust. I tore the letter in half and fed it to the fireplace, watching the flames consume his excuses. Bailey lay at my feet, tail thumping, as though he understood. That was the final piece of closure I needed. The sentencing came months later. David was given 3 years in prison, reduced with the possibility of parole. Sophie received 2 years, plus restitution. The courtroom was tense, cameras flashing, reporters scribbling. When the judge read the sentence, David's face crumpled. Sophie sobbed. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply stood and walked out, Mark by my side. Because their punishment wasn't my triumph. My triumph was the life I had reclaimed. But here's the truth. When the villains finally fall, you're left with a choice. Do you let their collapse define you? Or do you step into the space they once overshadowed and build something new? That night, as I sat on my porch with a glass of wine, the evening air cool against my skin, I realized I was at that crossroads. David and Sophie had been defeated. The world knew their truth. Now the only question left was, what did I want my life to look like, now that it was mine again? The morning after David and Sophie were sentenced, I woke to the sound of rain. Soft, steady, cleansing rain. It felt like the world itself was washing away the last traces of the chaos they had left behind. For the first time in years, I didn't wake up with a knot in my stomach. No dread of what excuse David would offer. No tension over which bill had mysteriously grown larger. No fear of what new lie might unravel in front of me. Just rain, and the smell of coffee brewing in my quiet, peaceful home. I sat by the window with Bailey curled at my feet and thought about everything that had led me here. For so long, I defined myself by my marriage, by the weight I carried, the sacrifices I made, the humiliations I endured. I thought loyalty meant shrinking myself so he could shine. But in the end, the only thing my silence gave him was room to betray me. And when I finally broke that silence, I didn't just expose him. I set myself free. In the months that followed, I rebuilt my life piece by piece. The first step was practical, finances. With David gone, I finally had full control of my accounts. I hired a financial advisor who worked with me, not around me. We untangled the mess, set up new accounts, froze the old ones, and put protections in place. For the first time, I could look at my bank statements without anxiety tightening my chest. Then came the house. The home that had once felt like a prison began to feel like mine again. I repainted the walls, tore out the heavy curtains David liked, and filled the rooms with light. I sold the furniture he had chosen and replaced it with pieces that reflected me, soft blues, warm wood, plants that thrived in sunlight. The space transformed, and so did I. I even planted roses in the garden again. The way I had before the cracks in our marriage made me stop. Their blooms reminded me that growth is stubborn, beauty possible even after neglect. But healing isn't just about fixing what's broken. It's about discovering what you never gave yourself permission to have. I went back to yoga classes, the ones I had abandoned because he thought they were a waste of money. I joined a book club at the library, surrounded by women who laughed loudly and unapologetically. I traveled with friends, something David had always dismissed as frivolous. And slowly, I began to feel like a person again, not just a wife, not just a victim, but Claire. As for Mark, our paths didn't end when the trial did. At first, we were allies, bound by shared pain and a common enemy. We checked in on each other, swapped updates about the investigation, even shared small victories, like the day Sophie's belongings were finally removed from his house. But over time, something shifted. He started smiling more. His shoulders straightened. The tired look in his eyes softened. And when we talked, it wasn't just about them anymore. It was about music, about books, about the small joys we'd rediscovered in the wreckage. One evening, after walking Bailey together, he lingered at my porch. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft purple glow in the sky. He looked at me, hesitant but sincere. "You know," he said, "we survived something that should have broken us. And maybe that means we're stronger than we think." I smiled. Maybe it means we deserve something better. We didn't rush anything. Neither of us wanted to repeat the mistakes of the past, to lose ourselves in someone else's shadow. But we began to build something slow, steady, honest. Not out of desperation, but out of respect. And that, I realized, was what love was supposed to feel like. People sometimes ask if I forgive David. My answer is complicated. Forgiveness, for me, isn't about erasing what happened. It's about no longer carrying the weight of it. I don't forgive the way he made me feel small. I don't forgive the lies, the affair, the theft. But I forgive myself for staying too long, for silencing my instincts, for thinking I wasn't enough. That forgiveness is the kind that heals. As for him, I let the justice system decide his fate. That's not my burden anymore. What I've learned is this: betrayal may scar you, but it also carves out space for strength. Pain is not the end of your story. Sometimes it's the beginning. I am not the woman who shrank herself to keep the peace. I am not the wife who endured humiliation in silence. I am the woman who exposed the truth. I am the woman who took back her life. I am the woman who planted roses again. To you listening to my story, maybe on your phone at midnight or in your car on the way to work, I know betrayal feels like the end of everything. I know silence feels safer than confrontation. But listen to me, you are stronger than you think. Do not let someone else's lies define you. Do not let someone else's cruelty convince you that you are weak. You have the right to fight back. You have the right to walk away. You have the right to rebuild. Every scar tells a story of survival. And if my story proves anything, it's that scars can be beautiful, reminders of battles we endured and the lives we reclaimed. So, keep fighting for your truth. And if this story resonated with you, share it in the comments. Tell me your story, because your voice deserves to be heard. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, revenge, and healing. Because the quiet ones, the ones underestimated, dismissed, silenced, we are often the ones who rise the strongest.